So recently, I've been on a big X-Men kick, starting when Deadpool and Wolverine came out, and I went back and rewatched all of the X-Men movies, and saw a couple that I haven't even watched yet. I also started reading some of the comics as well. With this whole X-Men kick, I found I really wanted to talk about these movies, so I decided I'd just put my thoughts together and make a video about them. So if you're bored and you don't mind listening to a random not-so-critical movie critic's opinion on the X-Men movies, then let's get this started. So the first X-Men movie wasn't too bad, but at the same time, it's also a bit boring. For a comic book superhero movie, it lacks a lot of action, and even the action sequences we do get, they aren't that great and fall a little flat. This movie also didn't really seem to know what to do with its characters half the time. Like in every scene, the characters just kind of stand there, so stiff and lifelessly, and even when being spoken to, they kind of just stare awkwardly at the other person. Like the scene where Storm and Cyclops save Rogue and Wolverine from Sabretooth, they literally just stand there, and this scene is so unintentionally funny.
He's just standing there, menacingly!
Also, this scene with Wolverine being introduced to the X-Men and they literally just stand there. Cyclops literally not moving an inch or saying a word, even though Logan was shaking him like a newborn baby. One big problem these old X-Men movies have is they love using the X-Men characters, but they hate actually making them characters. These characters are only recognizable through name and powers, but actual personality traits are nowhere to be seen. There's like 3 characters that are actually characters in this movie, and the rest are just husks with the character's name slapped on top of them. Cyclops' only personality trait is he's the guy who hates Wolverine. Storm is just kinda there in this movie, and Sabretooth just stares like he has no idea what's going on half the time and growls. Like there's just nothing here other than Wolverine and Rogue's relationship and Magneto's evilness. Again, I don't think the movie is terrible, it's still a decent movie with a very comic booky plot, but it just feels so lifeless at times. This movie also is one of those comic book movies that's embarrassed it's a comic book movie. Like they constantly try to take themselves so seriously and try to make fun of the comic book aspects of it. Like Wolverine making fun of the X-Men and say how ridiculous them and their names are. And Cyclops says this.
What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
Yes, actually, I would. I'm sorry, I couldn't get scared here. I'd be popping a hard one. The only thing scary is how uncomfortably horny I'd get. No, but seriously though, why is Mystique butt-ass naked in these movies? Why couldn't they just put the white dress thing she wears in the comics on her here? What was the point of making her walk around with no clothes? These movies also love focusing on how much Wolverine loves Jean, and it's so trash. That ship is garbage, and it's so awkward and cringe in these movies. And it's not even like a real love triangle. Like Wolverine constantly flirts with Jean, and we hardly ever see anything of Jean and Scott's relationship, yet she keeps saying how in love they are. It just wasn't working. And if we want to talk about the thing I'm the most disappointed with, it was how they treat Storm in these movies. She literally does nothing. She hardly has any speaking lines, and when she does, it's shit like this.
Do you know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning? The same thing that happens to everything else.
And she hardly fights either, and when she does, she gets tossed around like a rag doll. Storm hardly gets any respect in these movies and is only here because she's one of the main members of the comics, but you could tell they had no clue what they were supposed to do with her. Overall though, the movie is still enjoyable to me as an X-Men fan. It's a bit cringe and lifeless at times, but has a plot I didn't mind, and when we were getting scenes with Wolverine and Rogue, it felt like an actual good movie. I'd give the first X-Men movie a 5 out of 10. A nice middle of the pack score and will kind of be used as the base when ranking the others. X2 is where people started to realize, wait, these movies can actually be kinda good. This movie still falls victim to using the characters without making them characters. We get a couple of good character additions, but like, they're trying to tell me that this is Lady Deathstrike. And I mean, I get that she was under Stryker's mind control or whatever, but that's such a lame way to use her. She hardly ever speaks, and she's just Stryker's lapdog. You only know this is Deathstrike by name and powers alone. I also kind of feel bad for her in this movie, because she's forced to help Stryker, then killed in a pretty brutal way. Speaking of Stryker, because he is this movie's main antagonist, naturally Wolverine plays a big part in this story, but he was already the main character in the last one and was already made a character. This really should have been a moment for them to expand on the other members of the team that were kinda left to dry in the last one. Also, if Professor X can just freeze time and anyone he chooses, how are there any conflicts in these movies? But I guess they do like finding ways to write him out of the story because they probably realized he was too OP for the story to make sense. And how come in the first movie, when he went to use Cerebro, Logan had to leave the room for him to do it, but then in the second, he was allowed to stay? I don't quite get why he was forced to leave the room before. This movie also has this coming out to your parents allegory scene. Funny it's with Iceman considering he was revealed gay in the comics, but it's like crazy to me that all he did is freeze her tea and they freak out like he murdered someone. Your son has cool ice powers. What do you mean, have you ever tried not being a mutant? How is this a bad thing? And fuck his little brother too. Bro is so jealous he doesn't have the cool powers and calls the cops on him. One thing this movie really does better than the first is the action. Between the opening scene with Nightcrawler, which is one of the best opening scenes in a superhero movie ever, and the iconic fight with Wolverine and Stryker's soldiers in the mansion, this movie really upgraded the fighting. Now when it comes to the end of the movie though, I get left with a bunch of little questions like, why did Wolverine take this kid with him to go see Stryker? How is Stryker not dead yet at this point from being stabbed? And couldn't Jean have lifted the plane while still inside of it? If she lifts something with her mind, I feel like she could have just done it without leaving. Regardless, this movie is actually really good, with only making improvements from the first. I'll give X2 a 7 out of 10. X-Men: The Last Stand. This is where people started to realize how bad these movies can be. This movie is very similar to Spider-Man 3, where they just try to do too much and it just makes this movie feel like a mess. If the movie had just been the mutant cure plotline, it probably would have been fine, but they wanted to add the Phoenix story so bad, so they kind of just shoved it in very sloppily. Like, it really feels like two different movies being told at once. I mean, Jean kind of just stands there and does nothing throughout the movie until the movie cuts to her for a couple minutes to remind us. Like, it's so funny during the final fight, she literally stands there and waits for the fight to resolve so she can remind everyone of the Phoenix plotline. Now, I will say, I have a soft spot for this movie, because I used to watch this movie all the time as a kid, and it was one of my favorites, so there's a lot of nostalgia attached to this one. But after getting older and learning more about the X-Men and the actual Phoenix storyline, it makes this movie feel so much weirder. Like, the Phoenix just being a split personality that Jean has because of how much power she holds was so strange. And if they weren't going to make that the main focus of the movie, why even add it at all? There was also just a bunch of weird character moments too.
Nobody gets him, son.
Like, why was Storm even mad about what Logan did in the danger room? And she says,
Logan, we work as a team!
And I mean, he did. He used Colossus's help, so they were working together. Then they decided to kill Cyclops at the very beginning of the movie for some reason. Does Fox just hate Cyclops or something? Cause he went from Mr. Bland, no personality in the first, to hardly even being shown in the second, then killed immediately in the third. Then Professor X blaming Wolverine saying,
What have you done?
and
I warned you.
but Jean just woke up on her own. He just happened to be in the room. Also, Pyro going from being Bobby and Rogue's friend in the second to being a huge dick to them in this one was very jarring. It's also so funny that this movie wanted to have big moments like killing Professor X and stripping Magneto of his powers just for both of them to be undone by the end of the movie. They were so scared to actually commit to that. I used to be confused about how Professor X even does live, but it finally registered that he transferred his consciousness to the one guy he brought up in his class earlier. Though I am still confused. If he just transferred his consciousness to him, why does he still look exactly the same? Wouldn't he just take that guy's body? And I still have no idea how Magneto has his powers, especially after having 4 of those cure needles stuck into him. But at least in this movie, they finally tried making Storm a real character. But that doesn't stop them from throwing her around like a kid's toy. There was also a bunch of other little things I noticed while watching too. Like, I find it hilarious that Kitty changes in every one of these movies. And during the movie, movie, Leech was shown bald, but when he shows up to the school at the end, he has a buzz cut, like his hair was growing back. So that must mean that they were shaving his head while he was in the facility, but like, why? What's the point of that? And finally, I'll add that even though I don't care much for the black leather outfits, the little touch they add in this movie with the different color lines on the suit for each member was kinda clean. Overall, this movie is a mess, with little going for it, but given my nostalgia bias towards it, I can't bring myself to fully hate it, so I'll give it a 4 out of 10. Again, we have here another movie I am super nostalgia pilled on. This was one of, if not my favorite movie as a kid. I've probably seen this movie the most out of any other movie ever. I always had this on. It was between this and Spider-Man 3 as my favorite, so you can tell I had immaculate taste as a child.
I'm gonna put some dirt in your eye.
And I'm sorry, no matter how bad people say it is, no one could ever make me hate this movie. It has an abundance of issues, but for some reason, I still enjoy watching it. Now let's go over these issues. Firstly, this movie looks kinda bad. There are many moments where it just looks poorly made. Like, why did they do these weird CGI claws? Or at least they look CGI. They look so strange and out of place. As a kid, I remember thinking they looked sick, but when I came back and rewatched it recently, I looked at them and was confused on what I like so much because they look odd. Also, partly because the movie looks not so great, a lot of the character moments that are supposed to be cool are so lame. And because they're trying to be cool and it's failing, it's just so cringe.
That's cool.
I'd also like to ask, how come in this movie when Logan was shot in the head by Zero, the bullet ricochets off the metal skull and Logan just shakes it off? But in X2, when he gets shot by the cop, the bullet not only sticks but also knocks him out. And finally, the characters in this movie are just written very poorly, and they do and say very stupid things. Like, where are you going? We also got Stryker contradicting himself, which could just be a purposeful slip-up from his character to try and hint that he and Sabretooth were working together, but he tells Logan,
Why didn't you tell me it was Victor? I didn't know.
but then sentences later,
When AWOL said he was coming after all of us.
so basically he admitted he would have known it was Victor. Now there are a couple of characters that I have no clue why they are even in this movie. One being, I don't know, Cyclops for whatever reason? Why did they force Cyclops into this movie? He doesn't need to be here. This is so stupid. And of course, I am contractually obligated to bring up Deadpool. Listen, I know they've more than made up for it at this point, but like, why did they even choose to do this in the first place? How do you butcher a character so hard and think it's a good idea? Why does he have swords in his arms like Wolverine? Why give him Cyclops' eye beams? Why sew his mouth shut? What am I looking at? Like, I get they weren't finished modifying him when he was sent out. There was no way this was going to go over well. He didn't need to become Deadpool in this movie. Just having Wade alone was great. I personally really like Wade in this movie, and even though they make fun of it later in Deadpool 2, I still like the scene where he deflects the bullets. That's one scene meant to be cool that I in fact do find cool. I will say though, after back-to-back shithole movies, Hugh Jackman carries these on his back. Without him, these movies would be borderline unwatchable.
Cuckoo got screwed.
And no matter how bad these movies are, you can count on him to give a damn good performance. With that being said, I'll give this one another 4 out of 10. And wait, what's that on the horizon? Holy shit. An actual good Wolverine movie. They did it. I'm gonna be honest, I have no clue how, and am super shocked this movie even exists. You would have thought that after the last one, they would stop trying, but thankfully they didn't. This movie feels like, minus an R rating, exactly what a Wolverine movie should be. The action in this movie is great, and even though they have the Jean and Logan stuff in this, it works better considering those were all in his head, and caused by the guilt of him killing her in The Last Stand. I see people talk about how the ending scene with Silver Samurai was weird and kinda brought the movie down a bit, and I can kinda see that, but mostly for me, it was fine. And I just didn't care for Viper's addition to this movie. And I mean, someone must have agreed, because her death was pretty damn brutal. Other than that, there isn't really much for me to say about this movie, other than a few little nitpicks from certain scenes. so I'll just rapid fire them here. If Wolverine can't heal anymore, how come he doesn't still have openings on his hands where his claws come out of? People keep saying that Yukio was talking about his death in Logan, when she said that she saw him die with his heart in his hand. But if you actually watch the scene and hear what she says, she very clearly is just talking about the scene later in the movie where he performs open heart surgery on himself. At one point, Logan confronts Mariko's fiance and catches him with other women and gets all mad and basically goes, "You sick bastard, you're cheating on your fiance who was cheating on you with me?" Like, there's no high road you're taking here. And finally, Yukio leaves with Wolverine at the end, yet she was nowhere to be seen in the after credit scene. Plus, I found it odd that Wolverine didn't question Magneto having his powers at all. Now, to give the Wolverine a rating, I'd give it a nice 8 out of 10. So that does it for part 1. I am still currently working on part 2, which will include First Class all the way to Logan, and will be the January video release. I separated them because I figured putting all of them in one video would be too much and make the video way too long. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed part 1 to the X-Men movies. Let me know how you feel about these movies in the comment section below, and I'll see you in part 2.